Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the 9% Show. I am your host, Steven Burton, and here at the 9%, y'all already know, we keep everything 100. If I haven't done it, not doing it, or not about to do it, it would not come out my mouth. So welcome to another episode here, and I am so excited about this episode purely because we brought on a guest that has like a completely different view of entrepreneurship than I do. Not that she is not a great entrepreneur, not successful, and not even part of the 9%, because she is. But you know, everything I've been speaking on is like shoot from the hip, go, take risk and really dive for it. Whereas she has really kind of like inched along and grind and hustle, but took less risks and was able to build something great into starting her own practice as a family and marriage therapist into a big old social media following, just doing the most with what she's doing. So let me introduce my best friend, my really great friend, Mercedes Coffman. She is a marriage and family therapist who was born in Suriname, South America, graduating with honors from Woodbury University, and even got a master's from Pepperdine University in clinical psychology. Been on websites, relationship experts on several websites, including Huffington Post, Cosmopolitan, Martha Stewart Weddings, Wedding Wire, and just so much more. Even on TV, she's been a commentator on The Insider, Fox Soul, just everything you could look for. She has been there getting it, and I am super excited to have her on my show. Plus, I should need to mention, she's been a background in entertainment, background in clothing, fashion design, just doing everything in her entrepreneurial journey. So I'm super excited to have Mercedes here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, we do like to give some toasts here at the show before we kind of dive into it, because we're toasting to the 9% of Americans that have an established business like you and I. And I know you don't drink.
No.
And so that's okay. So we have water for Mercedes today, but we'll still toast and toast to much success.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your success as well.
Thank you. So, I mean, I might as well put the cat out of the bag. We are very good friends.
Yes.
And we've known each other for a very long time.
20 plus, right?
Oh, goodness. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So it's similar to the first guest we had here, where I kind of known her history, but like we go like super. If I went way back with Shanita, like we go super way back. Mm-hmm. So I wanna the reason why I asked you to be on the show. So she does have her own practice, and I thought from a standpoint with the 9% is like having your own practice is a very scary decision, a very scary risk, and we kind of want to dive deep into like what that was going, like the genesis of it, and just the whole genesis and how you created everything. And then also just kind of dive into your history, because as long as I've known you, you've also been an entrepreneur. Like, where did that first come from? And kind of like your origins there as far as being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think that for me, being raised in South America, I grew up with a mother and father who are both entrepreneurs, and uncles and aunts who are entrepreneurs. So in my country and in my family, I was raised around a lot of very creative and ambitious people. And so seeing that allowed me to really grow and nurture my natural creativity, and it gave me a sense of liberation to really tap into my potential in every area of interest that I may have had over the years. And seeing my mom go from a real estate agent to a radio show host to a TV show host to now a dean at a university, and my father the same way, where he went from a real estate person to owning a farm to, all starting from scratch. Seeing how much a person is capable of within their own potential was really a blessing for me to grow up around, and to see that I also developed the yearning to see what I'm capable of and to really tap into that. So I think it's in my blood. I think that I am very creative at heart, and it allowed me to really explore all the different things within me.
Got it. And speaking of that creativity, I'm gonna dive deep in kind of your history first before we kind of get into the family therapist side of things. But you're a fashion designer. Ever since I've known, you've been super creative. What kind of sparked your attention, your beginning interest in being a fashion designer, and then getting to the point where you can wanting to sell clothes and have your own brand and things like that? And then kind of what transitions you to something completely different in therapy and like wanting to follow that, wanting to make that a career? Like, how did that kind of go?
When I first moved here, I didn't have my papers. I mean, all the people who are not from America know how tough the process is. You knew how long it took me to get my papers and my green card. And so when I first moved here, I had to really start from scratch in tapping into my creativity. And I started I knew I always was drawn to fashion and I loved fashion, but to learn, I started working with some gentleman I met in the mall who was a designer who took me under his wing, and I was sewing shirts for 25 cents a shirt.
Oh, wow.
Just to help him in his fashion line. But the trade was he was going to teach me how to sew by me sewing his clothes. So it was a mutually beneficial agreement. And even after I learned how to sew, I made a lot of my clothes from early in the morning till 2 in the middle of the night, just to try to get people to see what I'm capable of and to get people to buy my pieces. But it was so much harder than it might be for people who have their papers and who have a work permit, because I knew that it wasn't going to be easy working without all of that, and that I had to really work hard to get money. And I think that it, till this day, is one of my greatest accomplishments and greatest mindsets, is the humility I had to start and be okay with sewing stuff for 25 cents, because I was so passionate about learning that I didn't even care about what I made. And it's the same trend with therapy, that after I did fashion for quite some time to make money that way, I realized that, I have two things within me that feed me and fuel me, which is my creative side and my intellectual side. My creative side is related more to, DIYs, design, and my intellectual side is more related to therapy. And so I've always been interested in the intellectual side of psychology, the intellectual side about relationships and what makes them work, what makes them not work. And so I realized that when it was time to go to undergrad, and knowing how expensive undergrad was, I was like, well, okay, I already know how to make clothes. I'm not going to get a degree in fashion design because I already know that. I taught myself and I learned it. Whereas with therapy, I knew that you needed a degree for that. You needed a degree for psychology. So I naturally was drawn to do psychology as an undergrad, and then continued in grad school for clinical psychology as well.
Got it. So what was interesting is that you mentioned being an immigrant, and there's a fantastic stat about entrepreneurs in America. Majority of them are immigrants, and even the ones that run some Fortune 500 or started the largest companies. Do you find that, because what you pretty much broke down on a young age was just a natural hustler mentality, because you had no choice. Do you find that has gave you a benefit, or have you ever looked at Americans that was born in America and be okay, y'all ain't taking advantage of your opportunities here. What are y'all doing?
I've always agreed with that, the statement you just made, that I think that immigrants have a sort of fire and a hunger for achievement. I think that and I don't want to speak for all immigrants, but I know that for me, America was the land of opportunity, and it was such a dream. And so I knew that I was behind the curve, not being an American. And so I think that a lot of immigrants are prepared of how hard it will be. And I think a lot of them are very hungry to get to a place of stability and security. And so I think that what immigrants have that I think not a lot of Americans might necessarily have is that they're not too proud to start from humble beginnings. I think that a lot of immigrants are you know what? I'm just grateful that I have an opportunity. I'm just grateful that I'm making 25 cent shirts. I'm grateful that someone's teaching me. I'm grateful that one day I'll, and I think we're dreamers. I think a lot of immigrants are dreamers, and they're very grateful for every step. Whereas I think when something is given to you from birth, or something is given to you more easily, you tend to take it for granted. And that's just human nature. That's not necessarily Americans. And so I think that that's what immigrants have over, maybe a lot of Americans.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's definitely true. So I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit to the therapy side of things. But first, you kind of touched on it already, as far as having a passion for education and just using your brain and being smart and like, but where did the desire potentially come from for wanting to do therapy or help people, or specifically marriage counseling, or, I'm sure there's very different types of therapy.
Yes.
So kind of take me through, your decision there. Was there always an interest of yours there?
Yeah. So for me, I've always liked anything psychology related. I like how the mind works. I've always been interested in knowing how my mind works. I've been what I consider now in my therapy practice, I've always been an observational child. And so I've watched my older siblings and watched how they behaved and what not to do based on their mistakes. So I think that I've always liked watching people, which is where my initial interest came from. As far as marriage and family therapy, I think that was more triggered by my parents' separation and divorce, and having like a sort of subconscious interest into seeing why they didn't last and what about that marriage didn't work. And so I think I've always been drawn to looking at dynamics of friendships and relationships and to see why certain ones work and why others don't work. And I think that's why I kind of fell into it naturally, and I'm still very passionate about it. I learn so much more about it now, even still.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So let's just fast forward the education. Obviously, it took years of grind and years of hustle and, your masters and everything else going on with that. But you speak about humble beginnings, and actually one thing I always respected about you was your fact of like, you're not scared to get your hands dirty. You're not scared to start from square one and just work your way up. And can you talk about, I don't know if you was working in a clinic at one point. Can you talk about what, before you got into your own practice, like what your setup was, what your 9-to-5 was in that world? Were you still a student, or just where you at, were at in that space?
Yeah. So before I jumped into my own private practice, I started after grad school with an internship at a drug rehabilitation center. And I fell in love with the field. I think that it was one of the only internships left, and I stumbled across it. And I think that I didn't realize how attracted I would be to working with that population. But I saw how much pain and hurt there was in addicts and alcoholics. And so I became very passionate about working there. I was there for about 5+ years. I stayed with the company. My first 2 years, talking about humble beginnings, my first 2 years, it was a free internship. I did not get paid. So I did
free 99.
I did a complete 2 years internship for free, working with the clients there. And that typically looked like 8 a.m. till 3 to 4 in the afternoon. And what I would do is, as soon as I graduated grad school, I called the professor at my undergrad school and I said, hey, I'm really interested in addiction now that I work at a treatment center. And I realized that the school does not have anything on addiction. I think more students could benefit from it. I just was a shot in the dark. And she said, create a curriculum and come teach it. And I was like, okay. And I put a curriculum together. And as soon as I graduated grad school, I started teaching at the university on everything related to addiction. And so I was making money at the school while doing my 2 years of free internship and getting my hours to get licensed that way.
So it's one that's amazing, and like you're also a professor, and it's just so many layers here. It's amazing. But so when you was working at the clinic, you quickly transitioned into your next step was owning your own practice, I believe. What did you always have it in mind that you wanted to have your own practice, or was there something that sparked it in that space, or were you at in your life at that point to like, what made you think about that or think it could be a possibility?
I think that, as you could relate, every entrepreneur would tell you that I think the fuel and the motivating core of us entrepreneurs is that we love our freedom. We like liberation. We like to not be tied to anybody telling us what to do and when to do it. And so I think that I've always wanted that, but I am also a person who doesn't like to take irresponsible risks. And so I wanted to really get my license first, which is why I stayed with the treatment center for 5 years. And then naturally, I think what I'm really big at on, and a lot of entrepreneurs are, is you have to be in tune with your gut instincts. You have to know when you should take the next step. You can't stay too long in a place of comfort, even if it's the greatest place. And the rehabilitation center was a great place for me, but I just knew after 5 years that it's now time for me to graduate to the next stage.
So you could have had your own practice without a license?
No. So you could do, some interns have their own private practice under someone else's license.
Oh.
But I did not want to work at a private clinic for someone else.
Got it.
So you cannot go into completely your own boss unless you're licensed. And so I stayed with the treatment center for, I think, another 1.5 years after being licensed. And then I started thinking, okay, it's time for me to go into my own private practice.
Got it. So it sounds like you had also, I mean, it was great that you was able to, get the professor job and kind of hold you down there. But I know a lot of people, and starting a business, it's always like really financials, and the finance, or just the risk of the financial risk of things is really kind of holds a lot of people back and scared from doing that. Can you speak on, just before we dive into the actual practice of it, like, did you have that support system with your family, with your mom, your father? Obviously you was able to get a job while you were doing it, but can you just speak to the importance of having like a solid foundation along with, whether you were saving or whatever the case may be, but how important was that during those years of like grind years?
I would say that, I had my mother's support during grad school. Once I started working as a professor, I just minimized my expenses, and I'm married, and I'm blessed to have a supportive spouse. But I think that I never depended on another person to solely take care of me. So depending on what I'm making is what I determine my lifestyle on. If I'm not making a whole lot of money, then it's, frozen food until we get there. So I think that I've always wanted to do something that I was passionate about, and having the professor job allowed me to hold that down while I was growing into the business that I ideally wanted. And then I was able to scale back on being a professor in order to really grow my private practice. I would say that it's good to have support. I know that not everybody has support though. So I always say, do what you love, and you'll find jobs on the side to support doing what you love. But find out what your potential is first.
And it's amazing because, like, a lot of, I'm gonna just say black folks, we like to keep up with the Joneses and like to, front like things is good when it ain't good, or act, outward appearance, just whatever the case may be. But it's I can't help but just continue to grasp your whole story from the humble beginnings, even your childhood growing up, to your parents, to, the undergrad and what you did with the clinic. And like, you're just not being able to have a job and say, okay, I'm not going out. I can't, like, I have this goal in mind, and I'm going to achieve this goal no matter what, even if it takes me saving $5 a week or whatever the case may be. Like, I just think that's great. And it's like, I mean, it's an interesting way of like doing it, because some people just feel like, that's too slow, or I got to keep up with that. It's just.
Well, I think that's why I tell people to love what they do, because to me, loving what I do, and for me personally, psychological freedom is more important than anything else. So I'd rather have psychological freedom and not have any designer pieces than have designer pieces, but I'm shackled to a job or a company that I don't really enjoy. To me, I need to feel free. I'd rather feel free with nothing than to have a lot, but I have no flexibility or movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I said on like one of the previous shows, like my freedom is priceless. Like I couldn't trade in thousands for it.
No.
Maybe a couple mil, but no, I still need my freedom. No, we'll have to put some stipulations there in the contract. But okay, well, speaking of like, still with money and things like that, starting your own practice, obviously you knew that was the goal and how to get it. I assume that it wasn't that much startup cost, like you're opening hamburger spot or a restaurant or Perfect Tux and, just the amount of startup costs it takes to do that. Was there startup costs? And how did you approach, since you really have like a budgeting background and really tied into your finances there, how did you approach starting your own practice? Like from a financial standpoint, what were you thinking about?
So for me, kind of like I was saying, because I am familiar with humble beginnings, I wanted to take a responsible risk. Like, although I could be pretty impulsive now with things that I want, I'll buy it. I think that I didn't want to take a risk that I was gonna regret. So I think that for me, whereas a lot of my cohort or a lot of the people that I went to grad school with jumped right into renting their own space and starting their private practice that way. And so their overhead or their rent was like $3,000 a month.
Wow, from the jump. From the jump,
with just starting with their clientele. For me, that just didn't make sense. Although I too liked how their places looked. I liked how their offices had waterfalls outside. And it was very calming. And I also wanted that. I realized that, again, the freedom that I wanted to know that when it's time for work, I'm at work. But after work, I don't want to worry about money. So for me, what I did is I started by just renting a space with other therapists only on the hours that I was scheduling people.
Oh, so, almost like a work share type of space.
Yes, but it was a building with other psychologists and therapists. So it was all a professional building with a waiting room and everything very confidential for the privacy of the patients. But it wasn't something that I was tied to or shackled to have to pay monthly. And I think that to me, it was worth not having that stress and to have a place that I shared that may have been much smaller or not as luxurious as maybe some other people who started their private practice.
How did you first, like, were you researching that type of thing? Like, how did you even know that existed?
Yeah, so I was researching places for rent, and then I came across a partial rental, and it was run by a woman who was a psychologist, and she rented to other therapists. And I was like, wait a minute, if this is based just on hourly and I could only pay for the hours that I'm actually seeing people, to me, I'm not dishing out so much more than what I'm making. And I don't have to worry about, panicking when someone reschedules or when I don't have clients or days when I'm off. I'm not paying for weekends. I'm only paying for the days that I'm seeing clients.
Right.
And so for me, that was like a sweet spot to start off with. And of course, I dreamt about like, how would I want my office once I get my office? But I think that worked to get some, a baseline and a security before excelling to the next stage.
So I got to believe that obviously the dollar signs for you is your clients, and that's how you make money, and anybody in their own practice. So how did you already have clients before you did it, or how was the risk dealing with clients? Because obviously if you didn't have clients that went along with you on this, it was like no money coming in.
Yeah, so there's of course a marketing site for therapists that I started with, but I didn't think that was secure enough for me to only rely on. So what I did is I started planting the seed with the clients I was seeing at the treatment center, saying, hey, those that completed, I said, hey, if you want to continue working on your therapy, I'm going into private practice. And I think I had 4 that were like, hey, I want to continue with you after we complete here. And so I started seeing 4 of those. One of them was free because they couldn't afford therapy. So I was like, I'll continue with you as well, because therapy is an ethical field as well. And so I just started with 4 or 5 clients. And the beauty of therapy is if you're good at it and you love it, it's a field based on trust. And if people trust you, word of mouth spreads really quickly. Yeah. And so before you knew it, most of my clients now, I would say most of them are referrals from word of mouth.
And were you still working as a professor during that time as well?
Yes. So my professor job really was like, being a professor doesn't pay as much. Most of the teachers of the world know and understand this. But the professor job didn't pay as much, but it was a secure paycheck. And so I not only loved teaching and I loved my students and the school, but it was the security that I needed to then teach at night and do my therapy in the mornings.
Got it. You touched on, bringing a free client over. And I wonder how, you have your business, what I'm saying? You can't give free charity to everybody, but at the same time, you gotta have emotion feeling. You gotta be tied to clients sometimes. I mean, how do you balance, clients that need to pay? Maybe they ain't got no money no more. Maybe they just lost their job, but they need this therapy or they're asking you for that. Do you, at this point, do you just maybe have a percentage that you will give out free? I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, in the beginning, I definitely did more free cases with people who I worked with in the treatment center, because I know how tough it is for people who are just getting clean and sober to get on their feet. And I think that it's a field of ethics and compassion, but it's also a field of practice what you preach. If I'm going to teach my clients to have self-worth, and I'm going to teach my clients to protect themselves and have boundaries and standards, I also need to have boundaries and standards and have self-worth. And so for me now, I have a sliding scale that gives people wiggle room of what they can afford, but at the same time, I know my worth. I've been in this field for a long time. And so I also have to treat Mercedes the way that I would encourage my clients to treat themselves. And that means not letting me get taken advantage of, and to give people what they deserve, but also to protect myself and my worth as well.
But does coming from really being, frugal, or having really that focus on, keeping expenses down, did that allow you to be able to be, to offer those type of, rather it's free services, whatever the case may be, versus maybe you mentioned some of your classmates that maybe started off and have the rents is $3,000 a month.
Yes.
I'm sure they can't be as flexible as some of
Yes,
those.
absolutely. So because I think that I started with such low cost in the rentals that I had my practice in, it allowed me to take on cases that couldn't afford the sessions. It allowed me to work with people who were struggling or were getting on their feet, or maybe could pay 2 weeks from the date of the session. Whereas once you're shackled to a huge luxurious space, you can't do that. And as a therapist, it makes you less ethical and less compassionate. And that's why I would suggest that every therapist, once they start off in their private practice, to start small on a smaller scale as far as expenses, so that they could build a clientele and so that they could work also on what they feel comfortable with clients, and see more people based on compassion and expertise, more so than just, I need you to be here and pay me full price because
Right.
my rent is astronomically high, so I definitely think it allowed me more space to see people for free.
Okay, so it sounds like the biggest risk there was literally the rent, or in that field, and obviously the clients that you want to keep coming. Is there also any other things that maybe people just don't realize in the world of therapy, that you guys have to, your industry goes through X, Y, Z, and if you had to give advice to a practicing therapist,
Yeah, every 2 years you have to redo, you have to take continuing education classes. So every 2 years it's about, upwards to $400 or $500. You have to renew your license. That's another thing. So continuing education, which is lots of hours of taking classes. Now they're online, so you could take it in the comfort of your home or your office, wherever you choose. But you have to continue your education to be up to date with the laws and the ethics of the field. You have to renew your license, which is an expense. You have to pay for marketing and advertisement. And then your rent, wherever you are for your private practice. So it's not, and then also if you want to frequent, a speaker, or you want to go to a network mixer to help other therapists, there are some expensive, but not as much as maybe the typical business that has overheads like Perfect Tux and, supplies and
right.
all of that.
So speaking of that marketing, I think, obviously it seems like word of mouth was a big driving factor. It might be probably continue as referrals and things like that. But you have gathered a nice social media following. Congratulations on that. Your mental minutes and all the free gems that you give out there on a daily basis. Well, one, was that purposeful to dive into that, or was that something that, because you had a social media account, from a personal standpoint, and maybe even probably for your fashion things you did back in the day, but what drove it for the therapy side, and kind of what initially kind of started there as far as that in social media?
I think I wanted to take my therapy a little further. I wanted to brand myself a little bit more seriously as a therapist. And so I did not intend on making it a marketing tool. I love what I do. I love quotes. I love the mental minutes. I love the topics that I talk about. And so for me, every day I think about new quotes and tidbits to kind of get people the help that they need that might not be able to afford therapy. So my way of kind of giving back to the people that now I might not do free sessions, but I will do free, gems on my social media account. And I think that because I do it and I started doing it because I love doing it, it allowed me to be consistent. It allowed me to be patient. And I literally had no expectations for it. And I think it just took off. And now it's a great marketing tool and referral tool. It's kind of like my digital resume for people to look at what I do before they come to me. And so it kind of takes care of the consultation aspect. Right. They kind of know what I'm about before they even start the sessions.
So, speaking of that consistency, and I'm personally learning that on the 9% stuff, it takes a lot to put out this content on a consistent basis, I'll tell you. But can you speak, I guess, because obviously you fell into the world of being a content creator at the same time. And some people might just come on your page and be like, oh my gosh, she has all these followers. Of course she's going to have all these views and everything like that. But, you didn't always have a lot of followers. And then, like they said, you started organically or just because it's something you wanted to do. But how long would you say it took for you to start seeing traction with it? Or just even maybe realizing like, oh, I'm onto something here. Or was it the first viral video? What exactly kind of took it off?
So I think it was a viral video. I think it was a video of my husband and I doing something silly or loving. I think it was a love language video. And that just took off. I had no expectations for it, and I think it went up to like 5 million.
Oh my goodness. 5
million views, and I was like, it's like sometimes the most unexpected videos that really take off. And I think since then it catapulted me to like almost double the number I had, to where after that, along with some of my celebrity clients who are following me, who repost my stuff sometimes, gets their followings to follow me. So I think once I started seeing the traction, not only was it more motivating, but it got more people to come to my page. And I think that, once you get the traction, it's upwards and still than then. But for me, it took years. It's not social media, as with entrepreneurship. It's not something that you should do only for a week, or that you should do something that you don't like. I think you need to love what you post. Yeah. And I think you need to believe in it, and it'll just seem like fun to do it.
Yeah, and it's funny because by the time this release, it probably will be a couple of episodes ago, or more than a few, but I spoke on during my 5 myths of business gurus that I absolutely hate. But a big thing is that I feel like people drive social media so much that they get discouraged because they feel like, oh my goodness, I'm posting something and 5 people have seen it and I can't do it. Or I think the important thing to realize with you is you were in the real world grinding and building this clientele and had a physical location and all this stuff. And social media was secondary that eventually kind of took off. So you kind of gave some advice to if someone's looking to start a social media, in the self-practicing space, but now that you kind of, I guess, are more aware of your social media presence and aware of the content you put out, what advice would you have as far as someone looking to start in that and just really put out the right content? Is it as simple as just loving what you do and posting it? Or do you you put it out at a certain time? Have you learned the algorithm? Have you learned keyword? I mean, you know.
Yes, I think that there's a couple of things that have worked for me personally. I think that loving what you post is the first thing. I would say that the second thing is have a brand. I think that have a brand, meaning be consistent. Who are you? What are you trying to share with the world? What is the message or what's the idea that you want to share? And be consistent within that purpose of your page. Your page should always have a purpose. Then I also think the step that I took a little further is I'm big on the psychology of color, about what calms you. So for me, earth tones are very calming. My page is all about whites, browns, greens, because those colors calm people. And so it's about, taking it a step further and thinking about the psychology of color and the psychology of the content that you create visually and how that stimulates and supports the goal of your page, and your purpose. I think after that, it's about consistency. It's about seeing when you get more likes, what time that you post that particular one, because then that will show you. Also look at the algorithm. Instagram is really good on showing you what state most of your followers are in or where you tend to get most likes. So if it's New York, then post more on East Coast time. Also, I think always explore with different things as far as different times. Don't only post at the same time. Don't only post quotes or pictures. Do videos, do carousels. So I think it's all about a playground to explore different things. And then just be patient. Don't do it for the following. I think if you're doing it for the following, just like if you're going into business just for the money, chances are you're going to get discouraged and you're going to stop. When you're doing it because you love it, it's just in your blood and you're not going to stop. And then eventually it's going to be a pleasant surprise to see that your page is now making, lots of followings and money.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely the goal. That's definitely the goal here at the 9%. So speaking of branding, you mentioned branding and kind of, building that brand. You have recently got back into the fashion world. I don't know if you technically ever left, but I mean, from an outside standpoint, can you speak to just what one, you can shout out the website and the subscription service you have now, but what was that just something that was always there itching at you, or what kind of transitioned you back to exploring fashion clothing, and how do you tie that in with your brand now? Because maybe, when you were, a teenager in your young 20s, you saw it maybe in a different space at that time. How do you tie that into where you're at now for where you're at?
Yeah, I think that I've never left. I've always been passionate about fashion. I still make stuff for myself if I really like something. But I wanted to merge the two. And the reason why I like this particular clothing venture, MercedesKaufmannsCloset.com, is because it's a rental/purchase subscription service. And I really am big on minimalism. I'm big on decluttering the mind, the body, and the home. And so the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because for those of us who like fashion but don't want a closet that is overwhelming or cluttered, what this website allows you to do is you get to stay up to date with all the newest fashion, and it keeps getting updated every Monday with new pieces, and you get to rent it for however long you choose at a flat monthly rate. And whatever you want to buy, you get to buy at up to 60% discounted rate. So it's very beneficial for those who want a closet only with pieces that they absolutely love, but also want to keep trying new things and having fun with new fashion. So like this blazer is of my website, and I think that it's just great for people who want to be fashionable but don't want to have the guilt attached to buying stuff or having too much. It's guilt-free therapy is what I like to call it.
Guilt-free therapy.
Yes.
I heard that.
Guilt-free retail therapy.
Oh, okay. But then I love the plug there.
Yes.
You got to
Yes.
Natural entrepreneur. Well, so let me ask you. Well, okay. Well, let me ask you this: seeing that you did create this brand and it's really taken off on your marriage and family therapy, were you hesitant at all of mixing it back in? Were you were those same risks coming back? Now I'm will they like me, or will they,
Absolutely. I think that merging fashion back into my page, you could definitely see that people are more used to seeing me in the therapy realm. And so it's still kind of new because it's not a fashion page. But at the same time, I believe in authenticity and it's me, So if I post about my marriage or about animals or about fashion, that's me. And as a therapist, I want to give people glimpses of me and my personality, not too much, but just enough to kind of understand that I'm a person too. And these are my personal interests and the things that I'm passionate about.
Got it. So how did you tackle this world of fashion now versus when you were younger with it? As far as, it's a whole different space and being in subscription model. I know you did some things in e-commerce back in the day and stuff too, but like, it sounds like you're not creating these pieces one off and, selling them, which you also did that back in the day. Like, how did your mindset change on the business side of clothing?
Yes. I think my mindset has changed tremendously as I've gotten older, wiser, I would say. I think that I believe in working smarter, not harder. I've hustled very hard my younger days. Mm-hmm. I think it's time for me now to enjoy stuff. So I only do things that are low stress. I only take on opportunities that are low stress now. I'm very big in work-life balance. So for me, this opportunity made sense because there's no overhead for me personally. There's a company that runs everything. And so for me, it made the most sense to still use my fashion, not have to worry about, I need to make sales and I need to pay mortgage. But it was more about, you know what, everything is done for me, but I still get to enjoy my fashion and I get to gift that to people who also enjoy fashion as I do.
Well, I was going to ask about work-life balance, but it sounds like you've created the fashion world to be like, to work with your schedule already. So I guess it was really not a thing about balancing those two worlds, but is it, how much does the fashion time take up of your time, or even if you're thinking about marketing efforts for it or whatever you're thinking?
So the fashion, just as with therapy, it does take time. When I do my mental minutes, how the 9% show, it takes time and effort and dedication. But I make sure that I dedicate specific time for when I create content that doesn't interfere with my marriage, my personal self-care, or my time with my animals. And so I think that's very important. And as an entrepreneur, sometimes we tend to get focused on a goal or on a money goal or a business goal, and we lose sight of balance, especially if you're passionate about what we do. And I've been there. There's been times that I didn't go to bed until 2 a.m. and, didn't see my husband until the next day because I was so passionately sewing stuff and creating fashion. I think now it's about, my work is very important to me, but not more important than my life and my relationship. And so for me, it's about creating the right balance. Otherwise, as an entrepreneur, you could drown very easily into the things that we do.
Right. Well, it seems like you got it all figured out. You got the education, all the rule books to it. I could take some of these tidbits.
Learning.
I guess I could just call you and ask for some advice. So, where do you see yourself going with everything? What's the perfect 5 years from now look like for you?
Honestly, I am stress-free at the moment, where to me, I'm just curious. I'm in a stage where I'm grateful that I could just be curious about what's next. I have established a secure foundation in my businesses where now I'm just seeing what's next, whether that's a collaboration with companies that align with what my mission is and my purpose is, or what my message to the world is, or if it's, interviews or my podcasts, things that align. I don't really want to do anything anymore that will cost me too much stress or hassle at this point. So honestly, I'm just curious. Once I know more, I'll let you know. But for now, it's just about maintaining. I think that's another thing too. I think entrepreneurs, because we tend to get in such a high stress state often, we forget to just maintain what we already got. We're always looking at what's the next goal, what's the next goal, what's the next goal. And it's almost like a biochemical addiction. And so I think I'm challenging myself often to say, just take care of what you have, nurture that, water that, and just be grateful for that.
It's super wild because we have literally two totally different views to entrepreneurship, but yet we get to the same place in life. Like, I wonder if, like me, I was like, I quit my job cold turkey. I was like diving in, like I'm doing this, like I'm taking, like I was like shooting for the moon, like from the jump. And not saying like I give advice to people, just, and I will say also, I think it kind of depends on the industry, with the product, with the services. That kind of goes with what you're doing. Like, you know, with you had the ability to kind of like start it slowly, kind of, you know, work your way up, and you know, just not saying there was no grind and hustle with it, but you had that ability. It wasn't like you just had to be on the clock, like, you know, 24/7 with it. But do you, looking back on it now, in the fact that you had success with it, I mean, obviously I know you enjoy peace of mind and all that good stuff, but was there anything that you look back now on that maybe you were scared to do, and you look back and tell yourself like, everything's gonna be okay, or like I could have went a little harder on this, like now that I know it? Or
Yeah, I think I went pretty hard. I think that one thing that I never been really good at is putting myself out there and taking full advantage of the networking aspect. I'm very interpersonal in intimate settings, but I'm quite an introvert in larger settings. So networking never really was my thing. You know, really going out there and selling myself wasn't really selling my business.
We got you.
Not that, but you know, like it's never really been my thing to promote myself, you know, loudly. I've always been kind of like a quiet promoter of my skills and talents. And so I think that if I were to do anything differently, I would say probably, honestly, I think I hustled really hard. I think I was very ambitious.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that I would say as an entrepreneur, I need to still and have needed to do a better job as, is to run myself as a complete business. Meaning, and I'm sure you could relate, meaning that there needs to be a CEO, a CFO, you know, an expert, and then everybody else. I am terrible with bookkeeping. I'm terrible with finances. So for me, I still need to do better in having a day just for, okay, are all my sessions paid? Who still needs to pay? Because that tends to be something in the business, any business really also. So I think that every entrepreneur probably should have different people within themselves, just as if they were to run a business, you know.
Well, those are great points. And like, I wonder, like, in the self-practicing space, were you purely doing everything yourself and wearing all hats? And where were your biggest challenges outside of the actual, you know, dealing with clients?
Yeah, so for me, I was wearing and still am wearing all the hats because I think it's such an intimate business that you don't want to break people's trust and confidentiality. And the more people you hire, the higher the risk of confidentiality being broken. And so for me, I always believed in protecting the client's confidentiality and running it solely just me and the client. But for me, the biggest challenge was finances and making sure that, you know, not finances I put in, but making sure that I get paid versus just doing the fun, hands-on things and not really the numbers, right? So like, I'm more of the creative, but I'm not a numbers person. And there's been plenty of times that I noticed like, oh my God, somebody didn't pay me from 6 months ago. Like, oh my God, there's so many sessions that were not paid.
Let me put on the bill collector hat.
So I need to, you know, I needed to learn to say like, hey, I need to have a bookkeeper within me that on Monday, I hire the bookkeeper to sit down and look at all of the expenses and the people who need to still pay and get all the money that's owed to me, you know, and then there's a person who once I'm in session, I'm all in session.
Got it. Well, let's maybe go, I mean, now we're jumping around a little bit, but maybe go back to like even structuring your business itself. Did you know what you were doing during those stages? Like, how did you even know how to start? I mean, you knew the education, you needed a degree, you knew you needed the license, but like, okay, do I structure, am I LLC? How do I pay my taxes?
Gosh.
You know?
Okay. So yes, all of those things I'm not great at, but Yes, I consulted with people about what the best form is for me. I think I have an S Corp, and I think that, I do my taxes and I do quarterly taxes. These are all the things that any business owner needs to know. It's like, structure what's best for you. But I think everybody should consult instead of just taking, about the gurus. Like the gurus, you can't just take general advice. Your business model might not work for me, so I think that I had to consult with people as to what works better as far as taxes and expenses. And to me, I'm in a sweet spot now where my main job is, as long as, my husband reminds me, hey, taxes are due. So then I'll pay my quarterly taxes. And outside of that, it's me just showing up, doing my therapy. And then after each day, I do all my client notes. Because in case a therapist gets audited or, there's any kind of ethical investigation, you need to make sure that you always have your client notes on each session.
Oh, wow.
Even if you don't work for a company and even if a client never sees the notes. So for me, I make sure that I am very good on doing my notes after each session. And just like any company has fun parts and not so fun things.
Right. Well, I mean, it sounds like that, as you continue to grow and grow your brand and more opportunities come to you, how do you, we're going to wrap this up soon, but how do you weigh, I know you mentioned that, you don't want to do anything that stresses you out, but the flip side of that, you have to grow or be willing to put yourself out there if you see yourself in that space or wherever you see yourself at. Do you think they'll ever get to a point where you will take on opportunities that maybe take away from the therapy side of things? Or is that your passion and you always want to sit down and do your notes and do all this for my clients?
So I think that the way I see entrepreneurship is kind of like a staircase. And then there is a balance point. I hustled really hard in the beginning stages. Like I said, I was starting from 25-cent shirts to working for free in an internship to making really good money now. But I think that an entrepreneur needs to always remain mindful and conscious. Because if you're not mindful and conscious, you'll become addicted to the hustle and you'll forget why you're even doing it. I think that for me, there needs to be a cap to where there's a balance point. Once you're at the balance point and the scales are balanced, you need to know that any other level will cost you something that you love, right? So you hustle really hard to get the things you want, the private practice, the ideal house that I want, a good marriage, good work-life balance. Anything I take on now will cost something that I love.
Right.
Will take away from time with my husband or my animals. And so I always see it as, now that my scales are balanced, I, of course, am still ambitious. I'm, of course, still driven. It's in my blood. But it has to make sense. And it has to be aligned with something that I'm already doing, so that it is a seamless integration and it doesn't end up taking too much of what I'm already doing. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget to look at what is it going to cost you outside of just money. Money isn't the only thing. It's time, relationships, all of that.
That's crazy you say that, because I remember when I guess it's kind of related, but I didn't always know the message and the meaning and the brand behind Perfect Tux. I was just hustling. I'm trying to make money. That's it. And I would take any opportunity that came across. Mm-hmm. But once I really understood our mission and created a mission and knew what our brand was and knew who our audience was and knew who our customer was, it made it easier to say no to certain situations, to say, oh, this is for me, this is not for me. It just easily weeded it out from the jump. So it seems like,
Absolutely. And I think I was the same, where I believed in the entrepreneurial model of, take every opportunity and then figure out how to deal with it afterwards. Right. That was me. Same with you. But I think at some point you have to get to a place where you say, hey, anything else is going to probably cost me something that I'm not willing to risk. And so I think that's, a life of balance. So
Well, I feel like I owe you a couple dollars because, like, I have some personal entrepreneurial problems mentally, and this was a good session for me. But we're gonna end it right there. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're super welcome. For everyone else, like I said, continue to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please load some comments out there. If you got some questions for Mercedes, we'll forward it her way. How can people find you?
On Instagram, Mercedes Coffman Therapy, and for the fashion site, mercedescoffmanscloset.com.
Okay, we'll also put that in the description so you guys can check out all that good stuff. But thanks again for joining us on the 9%. Again, keep hustling, keep grinding, and I'm sure you'll get on the 9% Club one day. All right,
cheers.
See you later. Cheers.